Mario Stefanidis, Vice President at Roundhill Investments, is here to discuss. Great to have you on. What can we expect from the trial?
Sure. So, this is really going to be a landmark trial for antitrust in the United States. And these results have large implications, not only for Apple, but for digital distribution as a whole. I think the most likely outcome is going to be an Apple victory, but any result is going to be protracted, and this is definitely going to go to appeals. So it may be 2 to 3 years out before we see any sort of concrete outcome.
Why is it that you think that Apple will probably win here? In terms of just the law, where does it stand?
Yeah, so the United States versus Microsoft, I think, is the closest parallel. That case was first heard in '98, eventually went to appeals and settled in 2001. During that, the United States government argued that Microsoft was unfairly bundling Internet Explorer in with their software and their suite of products. That eventually settled. That is the closest precedent, but as far as the exact facts of this case are concerned, and the 30% cut, which is a relatively new thing that has just come with digital distribution in the last decade, there really is no parallel for that.
So what is Apple's argument in terms of taking a 30% cut and arguing that they're not a monopoly? I mean, they kind of are. I mean, it's really only Apple, I guess, and Samsung that dominate the smartphone game.
Well, that 30% cut is really standard across the whole industry. You look at the Xbox store, the PlayStation store, Nintendo eShop, any sort of video game distribution store, that 30% cut is in place. You even saw over the weekend some rumors that Microsoft was going to take their cut down from 30% to 12%, which was later squashed by Microsoft themselves. This is a really lucrative business for these companies, and to reduce that margin is a really big hit for them. In Apple's case, they're really trying to grow their services business and eventually trying to have services become a majority of their revenue. And if they had to rein in that cut or make substantial changes to their store, that could be a really big blow to that goal.
So the EU, I just want to get into this. Last week, we covered it here in Wake Up with Cheddar, filed this antitrust suit also over the company's App Store practices. Does that have anything to do with this, and will that have any impact here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think that's just part of the broader antitrust sentiment that you're seeing worldwide. I mean, the EU right now just filed a complaint, like you just said, against Apple. It's not their first time going after them. A couple years ago, they tried to get taxes back that were due from Ireland, which failed. So this is kind of their second attempt at litigating at Apple. In the US, you have Amy Klobuchar, who is the head of the Senate Antitrust Committee, who has explicitly stated that she's looking at Apple and potential breakups. And then, in the courts right now, you have Epic versus Apple. So there's a lot of different parties that are all filing their own suits against the company and against large tech.
Even if Apple were to win, like you're saying, in this round anyway, in court, what is the risk? Is it just that more information is going to come out about some of these practices that perhaps regular consumers aren't aware of?
Yeah, and you're already seeing that. Apple tried to claim that they don't calculate profitability for the App Store and they have one P&L for their whole business. But an expert witness from Epic showed that Apple had 78% operating margin on the App Store. So these are really fantastic margins. And it's not a crime to be profitable, but it was sort of suspect that Apple said they didn't calculate this, and it was so readily calculable by someone. So that's part of the risk for sure. I think another large risk is the potential for Apple to house multiple app stores on their ecosystem. Right now, on iOS, you have to download all of your software through the App Store. That's in contrast with Google Play, where you can have multiple app stores. But what is static among all these stores, again, is that 30% cut.
Do you expect a couple years from now that we might potentially see that 30% cut be lowered?
Yeah, I do. And you're seeing it at the fringes right now. Apple reduced the cut from 30 to 15 for developers making less than $1 million a year. Now, that's a very small portion of their revenue because most of the revenue comes from the largest apps. But you are kind of seeing some movement at the fringes already. I think while it's unlikely that this case is decided solely for Epic, you may even have some sort of settlement where the fees come down, and that would result in sweeping changes for digital distribution in the whole ecosystem.
All right, great insight. What would Epic need to argue to win? What is the environment in which Epic comes out ahead here?
So they need to argue that Apple right now has a monopoly on software distribution on their devices. It's not legal to be the sole distributor of software on your own hardware, which is what the Microsoft case showed. So Epic needs to argue that Apple is doing that unfairly and unfairly locking out companies from competing with Apple's App Store.
If Epic were to win, what does that mean for consumers? What kind of changes might you see if you have an iPhone?
It won't be immediate, but if Epic did win under this, most extreme scenario, you would see multiple app stores. So you wouldn't only have the App Store, you might have, let's say, the Epic Store also on iPhone. And they would have control of distribution, and they would have their own revenue split.
And potentially, I guess, certain apps might cost less, or certain services could cost less?
I don't think Apple would necessarily reduce that on their end, but you might see the direct developers and publishers of these apps rein in their own costs now that they're not giving a 30% cut to Apple. Let's say it goes down to 15%. There might be a little more leeway with how to price some of these apps.
Really fascinating stuff. Okay, Mario Stefanidis, Vice President of Roundhill Investments. So great to have you on this morning.